All right, welcome everyone. This is our second iteration of Wine Australia's presentations to our team about the essentials of Australia. And I am Ron Edwards, the Director of Wine Education for Winebow, but I am not guiding this conversation. Again, this one will be guided by Mark Davidson, who was born in London and raised in Sydney. He has over 35 years of experience in the hotel and restaurant and wine business, 15 of those as a sommelier. In 2001, he was named Sommelier of the Year at the Vancouver Wine Festival and also won the Spirited Industry Professional Award in 2014. As a department head and instructor with the International Sommelier Guild, he was instrumental in the ongoing development of the curriculum and has taught classes in Vancouver, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, and Las Vegas. Mark is currently Head of Education Development for Wine Australia in North America. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Ron. Good afternoon, everyone. So session 2, as we did last time, a month ago, we looked at sort of the major points about the different regions. And last week, we covered an overview of Australia and Barossa and Hunter Valley. Today, Mclaren Vale, Yarra Valley, and Tasmania, obviously clearly focusing on regions that matter to your portfolio. But as I've said, and if you attended the last session, as I said, getting into the minutiae around the individual wines and individual wineries is not where we're going to go with this today. This is more about giving you some tools and ammunition to sort of sell people on the region and then by extension those wines. I will take a moment at the end just to look at your particular producers, the ones highlighted from Mclaren Vale, Yarra Valley, and Tasmania, and just have a little discussion about why they matter. Because I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle. Good. So anyway, well, let's launch into this.
I forgot to mention, Mark, to all the participants, we really want you to ask questions, but please put them in the Q&A. We will not be monitoring the chat window. You can talk to each other that way, but not to us.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. Okay, let's get this going. And it's not moving. Here we go. So Mclaren Vale, we'll start with Mclaren Vale. And also just the Australian Wine Discovered is our website now. I've mentioned this plenty of times before, and forgive me for repeating it, but www.australianwinediscovered.com is where a lot of this material's come from. So in addition to what you've got access to on your Winebow education site, take a moment to look at some of the information here because it's nice supplements to what you're doing. So we're going to have a look at the history, the usual sort of pieces of the puzzle in each region. But what I'm adding in here is a discussion on sustainability, but not just about Mclaren Vale, sort of an overall one. But it's awesome to look at sustainability in Australia and using Mclaren Vale as a lens, simply because it's a region that really is leading the charge. So we'll look at sustainability and what, it's a very undefined term, but we'll try and make some sense of it. We'll look at the winemaking, the notable varieties, and their characteristics and profiles very quickly. And then a quick look at some of the up and coming varieties, because I think it's an interesting piece of the puzzle, not just in Mclaren Vale, but in Australia in general. So one of the oldest and most historically significant regions in Australia. It's also really innovative and exciting. So you've got this lovely position of like history and sort of tradition, but not being bound by the tradition at all whatsoever. Mclaren Vale is very forward-thinking, looking at all the elements that are going to go into shape the future of wine in Australia, and Mclaren Vale's on the front foot. So it's always good. Beautiful shot, and I think when we get to climate and overall look and feel of the place, I think that is a picture that completely and utterly encapsulates what's happening in Mclaren Vale, in the sense that wherever you are, wherever you stand, you can feel the ocean, see the ocean, or smell the ocean. It's and definitely got a certain Mediterranean feel to it. So yeah, that's where it sits in South Australia. Again, South Australia being the largest production state in Australia, or up to upwards of 50% of the annual production comes out of the state of South Australia. Mclaren Vale being one of the most historic regions within there. Very close to Adelaide. The situation to Adelaide is also an important piece of the puzzle, because not one of the biggest cities in Australia, but still a major metropolitan hub, and that's always helpful for a wine region to be situated close to a major city centre. So a little history. It did take, we knew a bit about the hunter history and also the overall history of Australia, and it took a little while for some of the settlements to expand, and South Australia was sort of next on the block, if you like, and it was Tasmania then into South Australia. But 1838 was Mclaren Vale technically was founded. 2 years after the state of South Australia is established. John Raynell, and maybe some people might remember Chateau Raynella wines from way back when, he established the very first commercial vineyard in South Australia, and that was in Mclaren Vale. So there's that lovely history that connects Mclaren Vale to the past. Thomas Hardy established the company, a very famous Hardy's wines, in 1850. And in those days, it was mainly about sort of property and delivering large bulk wine exports to the UK. That was the primary sort of business being done in the early days. And it's interesting because the history of Mclaren Vale is not so much about boutique-y small production wines in the early days. It was about sourcing good fruit and people taking that fruit to other parts of the country and using it. And that changed in the sort of 70s, 80s, and 90s. Production is focused on fortified wines in the 20s through to the 60s. That is a pattern that exists throughout Australia, be it Barossa, be it Hunter, and any of these regions, simply because that was the mode of the time. Table wines were not as popular, fortified wines were the deal. Then Mclaren Vale in the 70s and 80s starts to establish its place as a high quality wine producing area, not just a source for good fruit going into other places. And then legislation is passed to protect the character of Mclaren Vale, sort of like a land act, if you like, that was passed to sort of protect what you can and can't do within the region of Mclaren Vale. Today, it's, as mentioned, it's really about this sort of experimentation and forward-looking attitude that I find very exciting about Mclaren Vale, and we'll sort of look at that through the eyes of sustainability and also the different varieties being used too. That's because I think that's exciting. I won't go through all these slides line by line. I think you can kind of take these as sort of snapshots, if you like. We are not, though, talking about latitude, as we've talked. We're always getting further away from the equator in this south of the equator. But altitude-wise, that's not a major influencing factor in the character of the vineyard sites in Mclaren Vale. Generally speaking, I mean, a high vineyard site in Mclaren Vale would be sort of 250 meters. In general, everything's fairly sort of low altitude. So it is the ocean influence that is the moderating factor. Definitely Mediterranean in terms of climate, simply because the ocean breezes that do affect Mclaren Vale there. They come off the Gulf of St. Vincent, and the reality is that's a more shallow gulf than the Southern Ocean, which is deeper and colder. So you're getting a more Mediterranean as opposed to sort of a cooler maritime, but it is a moderating fact and very important piece of the puzzle. Heat degree days, we can leave this. I mean, technically it's a warm climate region, but there are those moderating elements that come in from the ocean, and I think that's an important piece of the puzzle, and the breezes as well. So the temperature does drop quite significantly in the evenings. Not quite like Clare, for example, but very interesting in that Mclaren Vale, and we talked about this in the previous session, talking about the general sort of age of the geology and the soils in Australia. And Mclaren Vale started to do some serious work in terms of identifying the sub-regions within the Mclaren Vale based on geology. So they're doing some serious work there, and I think that's kind of an interesting piece of the puzzle. Right now, they've identified over 40 unique geologies that vary in age from 15,000 years up to more than 500 million years. And that's a pattern we'll see throughout Australia. And the reality is it's not a very big region, but a wide variety of soil types reflected in the terrain there. And it is a legitimate patchwork quilt of different soil types. And when you do see, and if anyone's seen, I'm not sure if I've got the map up here, but they don't show the geological breakdown. And you look at it and you go, okay, that's kind of cool, but what do I do with this information? And I think that's pretty much how everyone thinks right now. This is great to see this, but in time, we will, the work is being done to sort of, not like using Burgundy as a comparison, but that whole idea about, okay, well, within this sub-region, all sorts of varieties can work well, but guess what's really starting to shine? And that's where the future lies, and that's where people are. And you're seeing it a little bit. I think it would be hard to say, oh, I can sort of pick out the differences from, Shiraz or Grenache grown here and there. I would suggest, though, in a place called Blewett Springs, where there's high sand in the soils, there is a character that's coming through where people go, okay, that seems like a Blewett Springs perfumed, more ethereal, more lighter bodied style of Shiraz, and more specifically Grenache. So that stuff slowly sneaking into the picture, I think it's really exciting. Long way to go. The Burgundians were at it, the Cistercian monks were at it thousands of years ago. We've only been doing this for 150 or so. The big three, for sure, it still remains, and we're going to talk about the other varieties that exist in Mclaren Vale, because it's a wonderful sort of patchwork of a quilt of all sorts of different varieties being grown, and commercial as well at the same time. But when push comes to shove, it's back to the big three, which is Shiraz, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Grenache. So warm climate region, predominantly red varieties for sure, but that doesn't exclude some really interesting whites being grown. So progressive thinking, as we mentioned, there's Mediterranean varieties, lots of old vines, innovative viticultural practices. It is a phylloxera-free region, as we know that all of South Australia is, and that concept of experimentation, be it in viticulture and or winemaking, is where it makes it, where I think the excitement lies in Mclaren Vale. Just harvest dates, you can look at that at your leisure. Obviously, it's a fairly broad one. Some of those early ripening white varieties start in February, and sometimes you can get into end of April with the harvest dates of some of the later ripening varieties in Mclaren Vale. So let's have a look at sustainability. We'll talk a bit about Mclaren Vale and then just in general, some of the elements that have been carrying on in Australia. So what they will say about Mclaren Vale is that it is one of the greenest regions, for want of a better expression. Organic products and biodynamic practices are common. It's a very benign climate in Mclaren Vale, and you could argue that in many of the South Australian regions. So there's no reason not to try some of these practices, and that's certainly been, they've been leading the charge with a lot of people on board, either doing full organics, being certified biodynamics, or it's certainly picking the eyes out of some of those practices and just working to sort of understand their vineyards better, less chemical intervention. And playing around, I think one of the key things we'll look at the end is these are climate appropriate varieties. And I think that's an important piece of the puzzle, and I'll look at that at the end. Water management is something that Mclaren Vale has pretty much been leading, not just in Australia, but they've been leading with some of their practices in water management. I'll have a look at those on some of the subsequent slides. But if you can look at this point down here, Mclaren Vale has the highest number of certified organic and biodynamic vineyards in Australia. So, and one of the lowest usage rates of sprays and agrochemicals. Not a bad selling point in this day and age for consumable products, especially wine. I think it's an important piece of the puzzle. So in general, just adapting to climate change, I get a lot of questions these days saying, and I don't know, it's sort of a funny one because everyone's, oh, Australia, like climate change is a big issue. It's like climate change is a big issue everywhere. Let's just have that, make that sort of clear to everyone and anyone. And I think the reality is that while, yes, it's, we've got a hot, dry climate to start with in many areas, and it is pushing people into different practices and regions for that matter. But we are so well positioned to adapt to this, which I think is the key thing, is that we've always been on the front foot in general, and be it for experimentation with varieties. We don't have legislation that says you can and can't plant things as they do in Europe, which, and Ron, you can certainly jump in here. The reality is that that's going to have to change, and it already is starting to change because other varieties are going to have to be likely being planted in some of these regions. Oh, all you can plant is this, this, and this. Oh, well, the climate's changing. So,
yeah.
I think that's going to be something that's going to happen in the appellation laws in many countries. They'll be playing around with that.
Yeah, I was talking to Beaujolais producers who are actively planting Syrah.
Yep.
Because they know that in their lifetime they're going to need something other than just Gamay, is their thought process, and the legislation is allowing it for the same reason. So, and then you have folks like Germany who are like, yes, this is great.
We've got lovely ripeness. Yeah.
We've got really ripe Riesling now, so it is everybody's affected, but how is the question.
And the cool thing is too, I think there's an adaptation. What I might have mentioned this in the last session. I've done a lot of seminars recently, but the reality is that people are going to other parts of regions that otherwise would have thought, it's a bit cool in that vineyard site, too exposed, not going to plant there. Well, they'll plant there, and what seemed to be too cool or too difficult, playing around with different varieties, root stocks. I mean, the answer will be, and it's never, I don't think adapting to climate change and all sorts of changes that are going on globally, the answer is not in winemaking. It's going to be in viticulture. It's going to be in the vineyard and how people adapt to the vineyard. So all those sort of practices are happening. Water conservation, drier regions. I mean, we are allowed to irrigate in Australia. That doesn't mean all vineyards in Australia are irrigated, and we probably addressed this in Barossa, but the reality is that many of the old vine vineyards are quite often dry farmed. But it's fine to say you can irrigate, but you have to get water. And so water is a very precious commodity in general. It's certainly the case in Australia. So we are a drought-prone country that when utilizing water, we've always been very careful about what we do with water. And then Mclaren Vale's got some amazing practices. Depending on who you speak to, 20 to 30% of the water that could be used for irrigation is recycled grey water from Adelaide. They've also got this system, and I don't quite fully, so forgive me, I don't quite fully understand how they've done this, but they've got a natural aquifer that exists in that part of South Australia and under Mclaren Vale. And so bore water is used, but you're not allowed to draw for it. They've got a way of monitoring the aquifer to not draw too heavily on that aquifer, because you could end up, if you draw too heavily on an aquifer, you can end up with salinity. So there's this way of monitoring the system so they won't drain it too much. And they've just got these wonderful practices of for water, which for us is a very precious commodity, and therefore we've had to be sort of by nature, we've had to be very good with it.
And Mark, we already have a question, and it's really relevant here because it's
Cool.
really
Let's do it.
climate change.
Please.
So Madeline would like to know if in Australia already, I think is the intention, are some producers already changing what slopes they're planting on? Meaning instead of planting on that north slope to get best exposure to the sun, now they're moving over to the south slope, or they're planting, in a more easterly and less westerly, or what have you. Is this already happening?
All of that's happening, and it's about that site selection process. I can't think of places in Mclaren Vale where I've seen that specifically. I'm sure it's happening, but I certainly did see that in Adelaide Hills, for example, which is basically butts up against Mclaren Vale, where sites that were either too high or with the wrong exposure, people are now like, oh, why did you plant on that side of the hill? Now you're going, well, hello, genius, well done. That was that was a good move. So yes, there's no question that sort of experimentation has been happening, has been going on, and will continue to happen. No question. Good question, Madeline. Thank you. Yeah, I talked about the case study in water management and refuse. So I think treated water is piped in. So it's kind of a cool thing that Mclaren Vale can boast, fairly strongly about. Yeah, as I mentioned, I mean, I don't know that some of the experimentation and the collaboration doesn't exist in other areas. It's just particularly concentrated in Mclaren Vale, where people are they're all buddies and they're all talking to one another about what they're doing. It's not super competitive. And I think that's quite true in the spirit of Australian winemaking in general, but it's particularly on display when you're in Mclaren Vale. Experimentation, adaptability, playing around with all sorts of different things. Minimal intervention is one of the key trends. Playing around with ancient techniques. This is something that I don't think is exclusive to Mclaren Vale, nor Australia, nor anywhere. What's old is now new again, be it sort of clay amphora, be it well, concrete eggs aren't exactly old school, but just playing around with sort of older techniques, skin contact for white wines. So just, and it just, I think, brings to any region, and specifically Mclaren Vale, that lovely sort of more of a tapestry of different flavors and textures, and for that matter, aromas and character. So picking grapes earlier, I said this throughout when we talked about Barossa the last session. That seems to be a thing, and that's not like, oh, let's pick underripe grapes and try and make wine of them. It's just that playing around with those picking times and making sure that you're precisely catching those grapes at the right time, perhaps a little bit earlier, using less oak, and also producing lighter, fresher wines. And that would be a theme across the board, I'd say, about every area in Australia, but certainly the warmer climate regions like Barossa, Mclaren Vale, Coonawarra Clare, where you're really seeing this freshness element. And by that, these are warm climate regions, so you've got the intensity and the richness, but you're still getting this beautiful, vibrant, fresh sort of fruit quality. A lot of that's about the viticulture, and I like that. It's pretty exciting. Major varieties. Gee whiz, look at that, Shiraz, what a surprise. It's definitely the king or queen variety of Mclaren Vale at 60%. Barossa, it was at 66%. So when push comes to shove, all this wonderful stuff dancing around the edges, but the core of what is Mclaren Vale is Shiraz, no question. I'll let, we can talk about the characteristics. I'm not going to read through the whole slide, but I do think there is an element in here that I thought was funny initially, maybe because I didn't understand blueberry, but I think that is a flavor element that really, at the very best examples of Mclaren Vale Shiraz, to my mind, have a slightly different tannin, a slightly different acid structure to Barossa. You still have the intensity and the richness because they're both quite warm climate regions, but yeah, blueberry and sort of a spice and licoricey quality, I think, is actually fairly common for Shiraz in Mclaren Vale. Not to be forgotten again as another good area for Cabernet is Mclaren Vale. We talked about, have we done Margaret River yet? Sorry, I've done a few different things here. But we're going to get to Margaret River at one point and talk Coonawarra as well. And really, you can't even argue that they are the benchmark regions for Cabernet Sauvignon in Australia. And as a global, examples, I quite often, with a lot of my American friends, I like pushing people to Mclaren Vale cabs or Barossa cabs as a first step to trying good quality Australian Cabernet, simply because they're a tad softer and maybe a little richer and maybe a little more akin to what the confirmed sort of California Cabernet or Napa drinker might have. And I think that's probably true of Mclaren Vale as well. Maybe a little more grippy tannins than say Barossa, but it's an important variety in Mclaren Vale. However, in the same way, this is the same as it is in Barossa. You got to be in the right side. It can't be too warm. Cabernet doesn't like that overtly excessive dry sort of heat. It needs to be in a cooler site. Again, these slides just sort of giving the basic characteristics of Cabernet. You can look at your own leisure. And yeah, my excitement for Grenache in Australia is hard to contain. And we talked a bit about it in Barossa, but it was really Mclaren Vale that led the charge for me and got me really excited about what was possible with this variety. And they've been holding the sort of beacon for this sort of more modern look at what Grenache is capable of, and capturing all those multifaceted elements of Grenache, rather than this idea of a narrow, full-bodied, lots of alcohol, lots of ripe fruit. Well, that's not always the case, and I think that Mclaren Vale's been doing a great job. Really well suited to the region. A lot of it got pulled out again in the 80s. Over time, there was, same thing that happened in Barossa. So it only represents about 5% of the total crush in Mclaren Vale, but 15% of Australia's Grenache crush comes out of here. This is still an important variety in Mclaren Vale. Some of the older stuff dates back to their late 1800s, sorry. But there are people are planting again, and they're recognizing that, hey, we really shouldn't have pulled it out. I was talking to one producer, and they said, yeah, this vineyard was only planted in 2005 because we were stupid. We pulled it out in the 70s. So, there's a resurgent interest in, and again, that's a climate change issue too, at the same time as anything else. It's like, actually, this has always been well suited to Australia. It's always done really well. Why the hell do you think they're really old vines? Because it's suited. So.
Yeah, and I echo your comments about Grenache. I think Australia as a country, and some very specific examples, Mclaren Vale, Barossa, and a few others, offer Grenache at the world needs to pay attention to this option. Now, Grenache isn't going to be the number 3 variety in the world anytime soon, but for those people who like the wines, whether they know they're Grenache or not, from Southern Rhone, etc., this is now a legitimate place for them to go shopping and have a different but not foreign expression of this grape. It's really fun to see it in such pure fruit drive and still have the spice and still have the herbal side expressed, as opposed to thinking, well, that only happens in Europe. Well, no, that's not really true. So yeah, I'm all with you on Grenache.
Yeah, and I just think there's something about the suitability of the style right now. And I gauge a lot of because we can all sit around with our wine wanker friends and discuss all this stuff, but the reality is that it's my neighbors I listen to, or my daughter who's like 25, and she'll talk about stuff and she'll drink something like this, or my neighbors will go, I had this Grenache. And I'm like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. There's something about the style of Grenache in this more modern iteration, with the freshness of fruit, the sort of delicate sort of aromas, and that sort of interesting sort of palate weight, I think is lovely stuff, and it's something to pay attention to. Okay, I'm going to be blunt here. Chardonnay's grown in Mclaren Vale. It's warm, and most of the Chardonnay, for my mind, is fun, affordable, easy drinking styles. It is the major white planted variety. I don't think that will be the case for long, and I'm not trying to trash it, but when it comes to pushing, we're going to talk about a great area for Chardonnay. There's all sorts of wonderful areas for modern premium Chardonnay. Mclaren Vale really isn't one of them, and no offense to anyone whose family is growing Chardonnay down there, but it's mostly for fun, affordable styles. But you will see a fair bit of Grenache and Chardonnay in Mclaren Vale. Where there is increased plantings and increased interest because of, and not done for trend or for, hey, let's just plant Fiano because that should be easy to sell. Well, that wasn't the motivation for doing this. This was something that 15, 20 years ago, and even longer, because Sangiovese has been in the ground since the early 80s, people just looked at this and thought, okay, we've got this Mediterranean climate, I think, and changing and getting warmer. What are the varieties that are going to hold their freshness and their acidity, natural acidity in warmer environments? And there was a shotgun approach in Mclaren Vale, without a doubt. And you can speak to some of the early pioneers at Coriol and Oliver's Teranga. They said, yeah, we've done this, we've done that, and here's what we're thinking. And you'd narrow it down to some of these. There's a lot more Tempranillo. There's something like, I can't think how big it is, but there's a lot more Tempranillo than you might imagine. We don't see a lot of it. But from my taste and from my money, Vermentino and Fiano, no question, there's absolutely delicious examples coming out of Mclaren Vale. Probably Nera d'Avola. Right now, I'm looking at Nera d'Avola, and what I'm tasting every time I'm in Australia, we don't see them often here. Those are 3 to really look for, but don't overlook any of these. I think it's a really exciting time for alternative varieties. I don't like, emerging and re-emerging, I think is better, because sometimes these varieties have been there for a while and they're now re-emerging as kind of high quality. And I think this is an exciting time, because when you're in Mclaren Vale now or in Adelaide, you're drinking this stuff quite often. You'll show up in a restaurant on a hot summer evening and you'll order a bottle of Fiano in a heartbeat. So,
yeah, I was privileged to taste at least one example of everything on that screen while I was in Mclaren Vale. What was that, 16, 18 months ago now? Cool. And I was thrilled to see the experimentation, and it made complete sense to me. Yeah, Nera d'Avola, Sicily, Mclaren Vale, sure. Totally. Why not? Yeah. And the Fianos were very nice.
Yeah, and they've got the weight too, because I think what you want with Fiano is not, because we only got really, what are our benchmarks for Fiano? We've got, Avellino, but I think it's got to have that freshness and lift, but it's got to have a bit of weight and texture, and I think that's what Mclaren Vale is doing a great job in terms of capturing. I'll let you guys look at the rest of this in terms of exports, but I think the key thing in the bottom of this slide is 90% red, 10% white. I don't see that changing appreciably, but you can see it's a red wine producing region. Oh, that's actually Yangara, not one of your producers, but certainly something that you guys would have experienced. That's been in the market for quite some time now. He's been playing around with concrete eggs for Grenache, straight Grenache, and Roussanne, and a couple other varieties, which is kind of cool. Tasmania. I'm not sure what it is about Tasmania for North Americans.
I'm not either, but man, what a beautiful place.
It's a magic place. I think it's the Tasmanian devil. I'm convinced of it, but it is fantastic. I
don't know what it is, but there's a feeling as soon as you step off the plane that you're somewhere that you've just never experienced anything quite like this before. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, it's so true. You have to remind yourself you're in Australia. Well, you are reminded because you can get really good meat pies and there's all sorts of things there. But the reality is that it's like, oh man, this is just like, it's cool and it's green and it's a very unique and very, very special place. Awesome for Chardonnay and Pinot. And I think what's happening is people, your company specifically has a couple of very notable producers that have gone down into early in the piece and more recently have gone down and go, okay, this is the place. We're going to buy some land here. We're going to do some really cool stuff or buy an established vineyard site down here. So that's been, the answer to a lot of the climate change has been going into these cooler areas. There's plenty of plantable land still in Tasmania. And another producer who's not in your portfolio, a guy I know from Yarra, has bought a property here and has planted it. And even the locals think he's crazy for where he's planted it because it's a bit too cool, a bit too exposed. But he says, I'll be a genius or I'll be a goat, one of the two. And, we all think he's probably going to be a genius. So we'll go through the usual sort of pattern here. Bit of history though. There's some interesting elements to Tasmania because there was an early piece of the puzzle. Tasmania was planted in the early days. So first vines arrive in what was called Van Diemen's Land on the Bounty. So William Bligh had a bit of sort of influence, if you like, plants them, but they didn't. Those early plantings of viticulture in any part of Australia pretty much floundered to kind of know what they were doing. There was a first significant vineyard in the colony was planted in 1823. So we're sort of at Hunter Valley time. So we're predating South Australia, but then William Henty sailed from Tasmania to Victoria and took with him cuttings. Interesting in the sense that there's a region called Henty in Western Victoria, named after this guy. So those cuttings actually ended up being sort of a circuitous thing. They ended up in Tasmania and they ended up coming into vast parts of Victoria and South Australia for that matter. That was the route that they took. So Van Diemen's Land, it was interesting because the Dutch found Australia 100 years before Captain Cook did, and they named parts of Van Diemen's Land, which was Tasmania, that they were looking for traders. The historians say they were looking for trade and they weren't able to trade with the local populace, the Aborigines, and so they just moved on to Indonesia and other places. But Tasmanian wine and grape community all but disappeared after this sort of mid-1800s. And then there was this renewed interest with a lot of Europeans coming in and starting to plant in the 50s and latter part of the 50s and 60s. However, I think it kind of was the 70s and 80s where things really started to accelerate. And there was some, some really interesting sort of trailblazing stuff that's happened in modern days now, from the 90s onwards to where we sit today, because everyone's going, okay, Tasmania, this is the place. Yes, it's cool climate. Yes, it's a little more challenging, and there are some hassles with that. But this is, not the future of Australia, because that's just way too dramatic. But the potential for high quality wine production in Tasmania is immense.
I think the real beauty of it is it adds another layer of diversity to what you can get out of the country of Australia,
Yeah.
because it's nothing like anything else. And you have all these wines that have the structure that you would expect out of European locations, like not Mediterranean, but traditional high quality continental places. And it's just such a different feel to the wines that are coming out of there. And to our audience, those of us who work for this company, if they have not tried Toll Puddle or Dalrymple or Jan's, please put it on your request list ASAP, because they are wines that need your attention, because they're fabulous. And they're just not what you expect out of anything from this country until you embrace the diversity of Australia as a whole.
Absolutely, yeah. And cool climate's the thing. I mean, look at where we're situated. Enough about it. It's sitting in the middle of the Australia's refrigeration unit, which is the Southern Ocean. So it's cool. Now, it's interesting because there are some pockets in Tasmania that are warmer. You can ripen Shiraz, you can ripen Cabernet. There's a few little pockets of it. Overall, the climate is cool, but there are some rain shadow effects similar to what you might see in parts of Alsace as well. Officially, there's only one GI. Sorry, Ron, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for our teams in their learning opportunities, there's a fairly detailed course that I built after being there. It's probably too detailed. So after this, they can go in and get the deep dive.
Awesome. One GI. That will change in time, but I'm not in a hurry, nor is Tasmania in a hurry, because there's something about the word Tasmania that is brilliant and sells the wine. People want to be excited about Tasmania. So there are 7 distinct growing regions within Tasmania, as you can see right here. Probably the most significant and most important, certainly for you guys, would be Pipers River, Tamar, East Coast as well, because you've got Dalrymple and a few other producers. A few other wines coming from there, and then down in the Derwent and Huon Valley. So you've got a kind of a cross section, actually. If you add up what fruit has been sourced for, say, Jance, you've got quite a few that could be added to this equation. Altitude, there are some sites. This isn't overall about high altitude sites. That could change in the future, because there are some areas that are possible to plant at higher altitudes, but the reality is we're up to about 400 feet right now. Again, lots of plantable land there. I think we're still under 2,000 hectares under vine in Tasmania right now. Crazy. I mean, you can look at all this difference, because telling you right now is not going to go in one ear and out the other. But the reality is, just looking at that little snapshot of the north to south, it just stands to reason that there's going to be all sorts of different soil types here. Schist, sandstone, volcanic soils in the south. There's gravelly basalt and clay and limestone. I mean, it's all over the place. All of which is still under experimentation as to, what's best to be planted there and how it affects the quality and character of the wines. You've got the challenges, and that's, I think this is if you look at the most established regions and areas in Australia, there were warm climate areas because it's easier. It's just a little bit easier. Cool climate viticulture is a challenge. That's just a simple fact. So wind, rain, frost, drought, pests, because you do get drought still in Tasmania, even if it's cool climate. But the thing here is all about site selection, and that is a moving target without a doubt. You're going to get vintage variation, and vineyard management obviously are really key. All the factors that go into challenging viticultural practices that you get from cool climate. Setting up windbreaks, drip irrigations, that's pretty much standard practice for everywhere. Bird pressure is an issue, so netting. And as opposed to looking at techniques in the vineyard to sort of shade the fruit to avoid the harsh exposure of sun, there's actually leaf removal that can go on in Tasmania, which is something that you more see in some of the cooler northern European vineyard sites. Yeah, I think this comment here moved from first and second generation. It's interesting. I think Tasmania was a bit sort of, I don't know if behind is the right word. I felt like there was just this small little, a lot of the wines weren't available in export, and a lot of wines, you didn't even see the wines much in Australia, let alone, overseas. So I think some of those classic producers now have had this influx of youth and experience as well, a combination. And I think Tasmania is about as exciting as it could possibly be right now, because you've just kind of scratched the surface of what's kind of feasible there. which I think is cool. Noteworthy varieties. We'll look at the styles first, but Pinot, head and shoulders. This is the variety that Tasmania is become known for, but not just for the still ones. It's actually been the sparkling ones. Chardonnay and Pinot, they're the two big guns. I think there's some real interest around Sauvignon Blanc. I've had a couple of absolutely delicious Sauvignon Blancs. I'm not sure if you guys are bringing any in. I don't think you're bringing in Dalrymples. I'm pretty sure you're not. But these other varieties do very well. Cool and sunny. What do we know about Sauvignon Blanc? Loves it cool, it loves it sunny. Riesling and Pinot Grigio also doing well, but it's really about Chardonnay and Pinot for you lot that is probably where the excitement lies. And then you've got Jantz as a sort of a hallmark benchmark example of high quality sparkling wine coming out of Tasmania. 40% of Tasmanian wines are made into sparkling wines. So you sit there very pretty with Jantz, that's for sure, price point wise and quality. Chardonnay also still really important. I feel like, and I'm not saying this because it's in your portfolio, because I don't bullshit like that, but the reality is that I think Toll Puddle has raised the bar for Chardonnay in Australia, specifically Tasmania, but in Australia. I'm going to get to Toll Puddle in a moment because there's some really cool stories that I think can help people sell the wine too, because it's not cheap, but it's also not expensive, I don't think, but that's another story. Chardonnay's awesome, but I think there's been this sort of like leaps and bounds in the last few years, and I honestly would argue that Toll Puddle might have kind of kicked some people's, and you know, someone comes in and creates an amazing wine out of a vineyard site that normally went into blended elsewhere, and everyone starts polishing their shoes because it's like, okay, we've got to do a better job. And I think that's what Toll Puddle has done. Pinot, I love the style. I think it's hard to sort of completely isolate and pinpoint what the style of Pinot from Tasmania is, because there's too many subregions. But overall, we are looking delicate, fragrant, and aromatic styles. And there was a gentleman that was on a trip to Tasmania with me. One of the first trips I did, pushing 10 years ago, actually. He was from California, and I loved his comments because he was honest. He said, look, he was asked by a group of Pinot producers, what did you think of this wonderful tasting we put on for you? He said, I loved them. I thought it was great. It was a real eye-opener for me. But he said, I'm from California. He said, I grew up on a slightly bigger style of Pinot. So for me, your Pinots are like supermodels. Absolutely beautiful, but a bit skinny for me. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Interesting element coming from a Californian. But I think the point being is that if you are looking for concentrated, rich styles of Pinot, this is not the place. I would argue there's not really many places in Australia that are producing that. But Tasmania is about fragrance and about aromatics and about delicacy. And that's, to me, that's what I like in Pinot. And I think that's what frames Tasmanian Pinot. And there's some other aromatic varieties. There's all sorts of fun stuff dancing around the edges. We're not going to spend too much time on that because I don't think they're in your portfolio. I have to say, I've had some delicious Riesling coming out of Tasmania. So if on the outskirts of, you might sort of see some Tasmanian Riesling, pick up a bottle. It's some real sort of almost orange rind sort of qualities to it. It's a little different from the Clare lemon lime thing. So worth having a look at. Quick, there's one producer famous on the Langton's classification. There's a Cabernet producer in the middle of the island, or just north of Hobart, called Domain A, just like a capital A, world-class Cabernet. Like blind tasting, you'd be hard-pressed to not think that was from somewhere in Bordeaux and a cool vintage. So yeah, so it does happen, but in general, we are not looking at sort of warmer climate varieties. Cool Climate Classics, you can just see from that lay of the land there, it is an absolutely gorgeous place. And I don't think there's a more exciting place in Australia right now in terms of what's possible in the next 50 to 100 years. I think Tasmania is the deal. And then we get to Yarra. And for you, this just happens to be our slide that's, typifies Yarra, but it happens to be Timo Meyer, who you guys have just picked up. And if you've had the pleasure, I think it's the pleasure when you meet Timo, but he is a character. We'll get to him in a moment. Let's get a quick overview of the Yarra, and then we'll get into having a discussion about some of the wines in your portfolio and why they matter. Yarra, all sorts of classic styles. It's a really complicated region in the sense that this is about site and slope, because a lot of different varieties do very, very well here. Right now, when people talk about Yarra, they think Pinot and they think Chardonnay and they think potentially some bubbles. The history, strangely, lies with Cabernet blends, even though it's in small pockets. And now there's a beautiful, a resurgence of interest in Shiraz, some of which are called Syrah. So there's a lot of stuff happening in Yarra, and it makes sense because of the different aspects, the different elevations. Even if it's not high elevations, you're getting all sorts of different qualities and characteristics coming out of this region. Sits just outside of Melbourne, so 45 minutes, if you're lucky, 45 minutes from Melbourne, and you are in the Yarra, which again, I don't think you can overstate how important it is to have a wine region so close to a major metropolitan center. It changes things for the region. You get an expansion of sort of interest and enthusiasm. It's been really good for Yarra. So you can see it effectively sits in the suburbs of Yarra. The Melbourne suburbs of Melbourne sort of overlap into the early, western sections of the Yarra Valley. So there is a history, dates back to the 1830s. Then there was Swiss vineyards that kickstart some of the richer wine culture that started in the 1800s. And then there was a bunch of wine regions that were established, and still going today. Yeringberg is going on. There was St. Hubert's. There was Yeering, that then became Yarra, Yeering, and Yeering Station. Then, from the sort of, there was a sort of about the late 1800s, it was booming, and then there was a gold rush, and there's economic depression. There was all sorts of other issues that went on, and people were not interested in table wines. They were interested in fortifieds, and Yarra wasn't the most suited place, and vineyards all but ceased in the 20s, and they were converted to pasture lands by the 30s. 60s, people started coming back in. You will see this pattern throughout parts of Victoria, not just in Yarra. And by the 70s, that's when the real interest of a lot of doctors came in and started planting vineyard sites because it was close to Melbourne. They started planting, and that was Cabernet was the enthusiasm at the time, simply because that was the taste at the time, but also the style that was possible to produce. And all sorts of stuff starts happening through the 80s, 90s, and into 2000s. And now today it's considered one of the premier cool climate regions. And again, another place of creativity. There's a lot of things happening in the Yarra, not just about Pinot and Chardonnay, although they are really popular varieties. We can skip over this. Altitude, there are some sites that get up to like 400 meters or 1,300 feet. And that's actually kind of where the sort of people pushing the limits and pushing the edge are. They're up in these higher altitude sites that in the past would have either not been planted or been exclusive for like, whoa, that's cool climate, let's just put that into bubble. Now that's actually turning into really cool viticultural land for some of the table wines. Continental climate with sort of some ocean influence. You would definitely get that sort of cool continental feel in the cooler months, and certainly even some of the cooler months of the growing season as well. Overall, medium sort of temperatures overall, but it's a kind of a tough one. Some of the sites are warm, some of them aren't. It depends where you are. It's that whole climate classification in an area as diverse as that is always a challenge. Adelaide Hills, Yarra Valley. There is a bit of, the soil diversity exists there, but there is this northern side and southern side, and there are some, now people have started recognizing the differences in the Pinots and the Chardonnays and the other varieties grown in some of these different soils from the northern section to the southern section, more volcanic soils on the southern side of Yarra. The big four, we'll jump straight down to Pinot, Chardonnay, Cabernet, and Shiraz. So not exactly it's not exactly innovative and different because these are all classic varieties, but I think the styles are really different. 34% of the total crush is Chardonnay. Generally speaking, it depends on the sites where you are. You're never going to get a big, rich, full-bodied Chardonnay coming from Yarra. Sort of light to medium body, depending on the vineyard site. I do think there is a peach quality. People talk about this white peach and nectarine flavors that come through, and I do think that exists in Yarra for sure, and it's something you can sort of pinpoint. Different from that power and weight and the intensity you're going to get in Margaret River, which we'll talk about, I think, in the next session. But it's a lovely style. 35% of the crush is Pinot, and it depends, again, vineyard site. Light-bodied to medium weight and silky and textural, and I think that Timo's wines sort of slide right into that more medium body to medium weight with that textural elements in there. Cabernet, only 6%. Most of them are blended, but there's only 6% of the total crush, but there's some absolute cracker wines made from Cabernet Sauvignon from some of the old classic producers. Definitely something to pay attention to. Timo makes one. Don't think you guys are bringing it in. You probably should. It's 100% whole bunch because he's crazy. But it is a interesting wine nonetheless, and I think it's actually delicious. But quite often you're going to see Cabernet Franc and Merlot and frankly some other varieties blended in. But generally speaking, that it is modeled a little bit on that sort of more medium weight Cabernet. Nice to be reminded of those sort of like 12.5 to 13.5% alcohol with that fragrance and mint and eucalyptus and sometimes little bell pepper qualities. Aromatic and elegant. Shiraz sneaking in. These numbers are going to go up. That I can assure you. There are styles, different styles coming out of there. The vast majority of people are using the term Syrah on the label in Yarra nowadays. And I leave it up to you guys to decide if that's more helpful or not. But their rationale, and perhaps rightly so, is that even in Australia, if someone picks up a bottle of Yarra Valley Shiraz, they're going to go, oh, hang on, this is medium weight and more savory. This is not what I was anticipating. And I was thinking of sort of richness. So that's the rationale behind using the word Syrah. But I love what's happening with this variety in the Yarra. I've turned so many heads with different Syrahs, Timo's being one of them, Luke Lambert, Timo, and people just gone, wow, where in the Rhone is this from? And it's that sort of quality. And then there are people playing around with alternative varieties or emerging varieties, Arnais, Gewurz, Grüne Veltliner, Pinot Meunier. That's mostly for bubble, but there are some bridal wines. Gamay, Brachetto, Tempranillo. There's people planting all sorts of fun things, and I've heard that there's some people sneaking into warmer sites in the Yarra and planting Grenache. So keep an eye out there. I'll let you look at the numbers, but this is still mostly red with some whites. A little different bit of a split there. But let's have a look at some of your producers and why they mattered. I didn't have a picture of Jance up here, but let's start with Jance because it's just like, if you can't sell Jance, you may as well get out of the business as far as I'm concerned, because that stuff at the price point and the quality and the way that wine's delivered. Number one, people love sparkling wine right now. The price point's right, and it says Tasmania on it. And I know for a fact that this has been very successful for you guys the last couple of years, and I think that's awesome. And it is magic stuff. And it's I think, never mind what the wholesale pricing on it, it sits at like somewhere in that neighborhood of the non-vintage. It's at like 25, 26 bucks a bottle. What's not to like about it? It's pretty cool stuff. So Jance, an easy discussion point in my humble opinion, and it's a benchmark. There's lots of good producers of bubble in Tasmania. That's always front and center when people talk about it, not just here in the US, but certainly in Australia.
And if you need to like, okay, I need a jump start. I need to know which should I focus on. Personal opinion here is take out the rosé. It's a point of difference. Totally, especially at its price point. It's really bright and vibrant. And rosé, we expect the rosé sparkling wine version to be more expensive than its regular brut version, kind of across the board. And it's a really impressive bottle for the money. So start with that, and then you can go back to the other the more competitive side on the other after you get them hooked.
Yeah, and I don't think you get much of the vintage brut from Jance. I think you get some of it, but boy, that's
no, pretty small allocation. Okay. I tasted through everything when I visited them, and I'm like, boy, I wish we had that, and I wish we had that. But start small. We'll build on it with time.
Michael Hillsmith, who is difficult to dislike. He is such a smart guy. I love using Michael on any webinars and seminars because he's one of those wonderful producers that doesn't talk about his own wines. He can talk articulately about anything to do with Australian wine. But he's a smart cookie, and he went down and found the Toll Puddle Vineyard, which in the past fruit was being sourced for some pretty famous wines in Australia. In fairness, but you didn't know anything about the Toll Puddle Vineyard. Planted in 88, the Pinot's delicious. The Chardonnay has been the wine that has completely and utterly turned heads, not just here. I've used it on way too many occasions to make people think, to have that discussion about Burgundy. But there was a beautiful moment about this and I've tried to because I think one of the challenges, and this applies to all of you guys out there trying to sell these wines, like Timo's, like Toll Puddle, the standard refrain, they're expensive. I can buy Burgundy for that. And my answer is this. Number one, no, you can't anymore. And number two, that's not the point. And I say that because understanding that requires a little bit of bravery. You've got to just be able to say it, because if you're drinking white Burgundy from Merceau or Chassagne Montrachet or Puligny Montrachet, you're not having Tasmania. And I think we have to be brave enough to be able to say, that's cool. We know what's exists. This Toll Puddle's not trying to be Burgundy. It's trying to be the very best expression of Tasmanian Chardonnay, or from this vineyard site. We did have this one moment at Decanted, the event that we did twice actually, but the first Decanted was magnificent. We did a big blind tasting, 100 people, all sorts of top master sommeliers, masters of wine, top trade from across the country were there. Michael was in attendance. He was one of the speakers. He was in the back of the room for this one. We did a blind tasting of Chardonnays from around the world. People knew there was Aussie wines in there. Went around the room, and my refrain to everyone was like, okay, tell me what you thought of the wine. Tell me what what was great or good or bad, and how much would you pay for it? everybody thought this was Merceau. Like 95% of the people in the room thought it was Merceau, and they happily would have paid $120 for it, blind. It's 65. So Michael's in the back of the room and he loved that. He got up and thought, great, I'm going to put the price up. But we all know that, $65 for Aussie Chardonnay seems really steep. But the reality is that when push comes to shove and you put, likes with likes, and I like blind tasting comparisons, but it's not about saying this is better than Burgundy. It's about this belongs in the discussion. And at $65, I don't think that's expensive. I don't know what the price is now. That's what it was back then. But anyway, this is, and the 18 just won the international the Decanter International Wine Awards in London. Just won the top Chardonnay on the planet. Period.
Yeah. There's no doubt about the quality of that wine.
Yeah.
It is one of those that when you taste it for the first time, you just kind of sit there and go, "Wow, really?"
Yeah, and give it a little bit of air, and most of the time we're gargling this stuff down. I've got one bottle left of the 17, and I want to hang on to it for a while, but I just can't keep my dirty little hands off it. I just want to drink it.
And it is definitely a Chardonnay to decant. I will tell you that without doubt whatsoever. And I like that point. It deserves to be in the conversation of the great Chardonnays of the world.
Absolutely.
Period.
Yeah. And this came out of nowhere. Like I put that with the top 10 Chardonnays in Australia, maybe even the top 5. It was right up there. And that didn't exist before 2012. Mm-hmm. Well, it did, but the fruit was going to other things. So it's really interesting. And don't disregard the Pinot. I love the style of the Pinot. I'd say for strength, the Chardonnay just seems to be sort of outshining it. But the Pinot's absolutely worth looking at. I think pretty much everything Michael's been touching over the last little while. I feel like, and I said this to him a while ago about his wines in the Adelaide Hills, and certainly this, but I said, I feel like your wines have never been better. And he sort of looked at me as if he was pretending to be offended. He said, no, you're absolutely right. They've never been better. And he's just been this constant source of refinement. And I think the wines are awesome. Then we get to the very refined sort of gentleman of like the figure that Michael Hill Smith cuts to. Then you've got the opposite end of the spectrum. Rogue and refined, I'd say. The refined would be Michael Hill Smith and the rogue would be Timo. He's magnificent. I love this guy, but he's crazy as a hat full of bobcats. German originally. He's moved to Australia. I can't even think when he moved to Australia. He's been there for quite a while. Planted this small little site in the Yarra and makes premium, top quality Pinot his main focus. He does some other things. He also still makes wine he makes wine over in Austria. He sometimes brings those wines back as well. I've tasted some of those from time to time. His Pinots fall into the same category. They're expensive as well, but the point is you are tasting a little snapshot from all the things, all the markers for what people love about Burgundy: small production, small site, small little business. This is Timo. So his Pinots are wonderful. I don't have a bottle of that. I can't afford to get any access to it over the last little while. But the reality is that Timo's wines are something to pay attention to, and he's a character. And that was we did an event in London. I put this up there because while he's not one of your guys, Timo's the one whose head is in it's Taras Okoda, who was the guy that honestly made people think differently about Grenache in Mclaren Vale. He passed away less than a month ago, but those two guys were like peas in a pod. In fact, those two together were dangerous. Stay away from that discussion. Great guys. Into Mclaren Vale. I'm sorry, not to also forget about the importance of Dalrymple, because I think what you've got in Tasmania, it's a premium cool climate. So pricing's never going to be cheap. There's no such thing as good, cheap Pinot and good, cheap, cool climate stuff. The affordability for Dalrymple is there, though. I think there's some lines in the Dalrymple range that I think are really, really affordable and worth looking at. The Pinots, in particular, I really like the Pinot. I think the estate Pinot is delicious stuff and really. And again, we need to get Pete, the winemaker, to come out, because I met him and thought, why are you hiding in the shadows here? This guy is hilarious. He's fun. He's entertaining, and we need him front and center. Not that anyone can travel right now.
Yeah, and he's a really good winemaker, and he does everything hands-on.
Totally.
Everything's immaculate. His vineyards are pristine. He knows exactly what he's trying to do and how to get there. And every wine he makes is really wonderful. And what's really great is between Tolpuddle and Dalrymple, you have different styles on a theme, right? Tolpuddle is a much more linear style of Pinot Noir, and Dalrymple, depending on which vineyard source, rounds off a bit. It's sort of like if we were talking about Oregonian wines, it might be the difference between a Saint Innocent and a Christum.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. No, I agree with that. That's cool. And then for Mclaren Vale, not to forget about the lovely Mclaren Vale at the bottom there, I've got that picture of the catapult or the trebuchet, an old school trebuchet. And it's funny because one of the first trips when I'd been to NOIR plenty of times, but I'd never experienced this, because what they do is sort of the itinerary said, oh, we're going to take this group of people and we're going to load up some watermelons and fire them across this field. And you think, this is the most ridiculous thing that I can't believe. I'm almost embarrassed. It is one of the most satisfying things you will do as a grown adult. You put this watermelon in there, it flings it something like 300 yards, and the sound of that watermelon hitting the ground is ridiculously satisfying. And I can't explain it any further than that. But the point is, the spirit behind Wirra is they're about having fun. They're making very serious wines, but that catapult was all about fun. And so anyway, but that's a Wirra story for you. But yep. I think there's many wines in the Wirra portfolio that I would stand by and get excited over. But I think their Absconder Grenache is starting to hit the mark as well. Their Mclaren Vale Grenache is something to sort of pay attention to. So point I've got here is that, and I've said this at the last session, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it in the next session. As an import company, you guys have just, when you picked up Timo, you've picked up Clonakilla, you've got Tolpuddle, you've got Sean Smith. We're going to talk about, Vas Felix and some of the other stuff from Coonawarra, from the Menzies and stuff. But the reality is that it's a tough portfolio to beat. I think what you guys are doing right now, the collection of ones you've got there, is a veritable who's who of what's cool and exciting and classic at the same time in Australia. So pretty exciting stuff. I reckon it's pretty exciting. So,
yep, it completely is, especially if you start tasting through the wines. We have a question, and it's a similar question to what we had last week, but I think it's on the minds of consumers who are interested in Australia. And that is that, a large proportion of the Aussie exports go to China, and you address this, and we can readdress it today. So, what do we expect the impact of the current tariffs to be with Australia's trade with the U.S.? Actually, this is somebody who a customer asked them this question the other day. So there's, you've got China gobbling up lots of red wine, and you've got us doing tariffs and so forth. So what are your thoughts?
There's a tariff issue with China? I hadn't heard. Yeah, it's a good thing. It remains to be seen what's going to happen in terms of how long it is, but safe to say that's a pretty devastating thing for many producers in Australia, because the market was massive. How will this affect the US? I think, and again, anecdotal, but I think realistic, I think there's going to be a resurgent interest in places like the US and Canada. And that's what we are sort of, preparing ourselves for, because some of these producers are going to be looking for other export markets to play with. In fairness, I think there's been a lot of producers in Australia. There have been producers in Australia that have all found it all a bit too hard in the US. And maybe rightly so or not. It's not the easy country to come into, because you're not coming into a country, you're coming into 50 countries. And there's all the distribution, all the issues that exist with that. But then I remember asking, going through this all with a group of exporters in Australia at one point. They said, oh, Australia, the US is hard. And I said, no, it is. You've got to deal with it this way. You think about this, think about that. And then I said, but then, what's easy? Nothing's easy. Selling premium wine is not easy, no matter what. So I think getting, the reality is that I think people are probably more inclined now to do the work. And I think, in fairness, the sentiment at all levels of the supply chain in the US now is very different than it was 10 years ago. And I think there's a bit more enthusiasm for bringing in Australian wines when you get to the US, as opposed to, say, 10 years ago, people weren't interested. I think there's a genuine interest in Australian wines again. We've sort of gone through the doldrums, and we're now back out the other side, and people are excited to see what's available and what's actually happening, because they're hearing the stories. People hear these things about this. Hey, you heard about this? I heard about that. I had an MS tell me, Chris Tangi said he's tasted that and pegged it blind twice.
Tolpuddle.
Wow. That's Tolpuddle. He said, yeah, because he's had it enough. But the point is that, there's people talking about these great wines again. And it's so nice to finally be at that stage where we're, Australia's back in the premium wine discussion, and you guys are right front and center with what you've got in your portfolio. So, and I'll reiterate what I said before about that brave thing. And I know it requires bravery, but it's like, hey, comparisons, we're not interested in comparisons. Hey, this is you're going to be tasting great, whatever this is from this part of Australia, and the comparisons are, hopefully unnecessary.
Only to get them in context so they have some sense of expectation. And then
Totally.
after that, it's about the experience of trying something new. I really appreciate another session with you. This is the last chance. If you have a question, type it quickly because we are at the end of our session. And Mark, I'm sure, has probably another call in 3 minutes. Like everybody else.
Today's not bad. I've had some days like that where it's like, man, I haven't even had a shower yet. I'm still on calls.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Got to get up early, super early. My calls start at 5 a.m. I got to shower at 4. Well, I appreciate all the time, Mark. You're always a great resource. And certainly your enthusiasm and the approach to the information is a great blessing. To our teams, there are other resources in addition to this overview that you can find inside Winebow Learning that can be a little more specific about Mclaren Vale and also be a little more specific about Tasmania. And there's some information on Barossa and Margaret River. And so if you want to read up early or if you want to read up afterwards, that's great. And session 3 is in January coming up. The invite will be out shortly to all of our teams and to our public friends. But we're going to cover Margaret River.
Margaret River, Coonawarra, and I have to look. I've been doing so many of them.
Oh, that's good. Well, that's good. Even those 2 alone would be enough for coming back right there.
I wish I'd looked at the chat because I almost used this. I didn't realize that Madeline asking the question was Madeline Triffon because my last trip to Mclaren Vale was with Madeline. And here's what she said as we were looking at that sort of picture of Mclaren Vale. She was raised in Greece, and she said, I feel like I'm driving into somewhere in Greece or possibly southern Italy. So yeah, I didn't realize you were on there, Madeline, but yes, it was a real pleasure to travel in. And hey, if you want to act and behave as a wine professional, use Madeline Triffon as your benchmark example of an industry professional. Love to see you there, Madeline. Nice to see you.
Amen to that as my mentor, and she's still my mentor, and I go to her often for those kind of pieces of wisdom. So yes, thanks, Madeline, for attending, and thanks to everyone else for attending. Use the information well. Get Australia on people's palates because McLarenville matters as well as Tasmania. And now I'm excited about Yarra again. I've had some great memories of Yarra yearing wines in the past before I worked for this company. All right.
Some good stuff.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Bye.